Hello and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I hope you're all doing well. Playoffs are in the book, Liam. You've got another week to sit and not watch any Green Bay Packers. Are you looking forward to everything to come?
I'm not looking forward to another bye week. I think that although it's good for the players to get a bit of a rest, I want to see more Packers games. So, but it is what it is. I'm not going to moan too much because you and a guest I'm sure you're going to introduce in a little while, we're talking about only having a 17-game season. So I can't moan of having more than 17 games.
Yeah, damn straight. I'm not sure you're ever allowed to moan about making the playoffs. I think what we now is it. I think it's 11 years since the Jets last made the playoffs. So shut up, moaning. But as Liam alluded to, I am very proud to again introduce another fantastic guest. We are joined by Danny Roberts, who some of you may know as at Dynasty Dan1 or Dynasty Danny, depending on how you look at it. He is the final quarter of the 5 Yard Dynasty team. Danny, welcome. I've got this wrong last week, so I'm feeling pressure, but this is your second show, right?
It's my second show, the first with the new setup where you get to see my lovely Boltonian face. So yeah, we've come up in the world, but yeah, I'm really glad to be here and see you guys again.
It's absolutely fantastic to have you on. And so, Danny, for those that don't know, I mean, I guess how did you kind of fall into the fantasy football world? Where did you first start playing?
So I mean, I've alluded to it a few times, I think, but it started off with we've talked about it, Rich, where you used to sign your name down, write it in a newspaper, send off your English football teams, and have to do your transfers the same way. But when fantasy football, the real football, as I like to call it, this football, came to the UK, it was just something that I really wanted to do. So I was joining leagues with people I didn't know, joining the NFL official leagues. And nowadays, there's just so many opportunities to do so, whether it's going through DFS, DraftKings, those sorts of things, or the home leagues, of which Sleeper seems to be nailing the market down with at the minute, which I really enjoy. So I'm just in quite a few of those now. It's strange, but making friends all over the world by playing a game, which and being able to write about and talk about a game within a game, which is a really privileged place to be.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think, I sort of, I guess, got into the kind of the fantasy world sort of three years ago or so, and it's amazing. I've made genuine lifelong friends, as you say, just out of being in random leagues that you join in Twitter, and then you become great friends, and people, other content producers around the globe. Really, is properly mind blowing. And how did you make that step from fantasy football fan to kind of fantasy football creator?
So I studied sports journalism. I've always been involved in sport, whether that's marketing, media, content in one way or another. And I wanted to put all the chats that I was having with people that I could tell weren't that interested in my football passion, namely my girlfriend, who wasn't interested in what my thoughts were about this week's fantasy teams. And likewise, when I got in our home league, we get the big gaudy rings because, they say in draft day, one of the most masculine sports in the world, but what they win is a piece of jewelry. But I've got my ring on the side next to my American football light, and my girlfriend hates that I have that. But I just keep reminding her that she lives with a winner now. So what we're going to do, if you win your fantasy league, you've got to shout about it. It's a big achievement. Yeah. So I was starting to listen to you guys and read a lot of your stuff, reached out and lucky enough to be given the platform to work alongside you. People won't have seen me pushing some stuff out because as Rich and Liam know, I took a leave of absence to kind of work on some mental health stuff. And I just wanted to say on record that these guys and the rest of the 5 Yard, you'll hear us talk about 5 Yard as being a family, but the support that I received from guys that I've met on calls like this and talked football with, just felt like real friends, and it did feel like a family. So I just wanted to extend my thanks to you and make sure that the listeners and viewers know that it's a really great group behind the scenes. They're not just great analysts and good football guys.
No, I really appreciate that, Danny, and it's fantastic that you can talk openly. I think it's something that us as men, us as a fantasy football community, us as a general public don't talk about enough. So it's been fantastic to see you come work through this, and it's fantastic to have you on board. And as you said, be part of that family. It's a truly unique experience for me. Certainly, I'm now just over a year since I joined the 5 Yard family, and honestly, it's one of the best decisions I ever made. So yes, it's fantastic to have you as part of that. It's difficult transition now to go from that to Liam talking about alcohol, but I'm just basically gonna fail the link and go, Liam, it's time for cocktail of the week.
I was going to say there's not much of a transition there, Rich.
I was trying to be smart and think up some sort of.
If I felt like I came into this feeling really happy and excited to be back, and then I remembered that I'm a Vikings fan that's missing out on the playoffs, and Liam is a Green Bay fan that's entering the playoffs. And I don't mind teams entering the playoffs as long as that's not Green Bay. And now I'm feeling slightly down again, but I'm sure I'll be cheered up with cocktail of the week.
You must have been miserable with the past decade then, with the amount of Packers playoffs. Sorry, I'll just carry on with the cocktail.
Fan, I'm miserable for the past decade.
I'll carry on with cocktail of the week to try and cheer you up, Danny. So this is a summer cooler. We're not in summer, but I needed something summery today. It is just orange juice, cranberry juice, and amaretto. It's very easy to make. I didn't even have to measure it. I just knew the parts, and you put it all in. It's actually really easy. It just tastes really nice as well.
By you didn't have to measure it, so basically you just poured a load of alcohol in a glass and made it look pretty.
Yeah,
and
basically, yeah.
Once
you just count.
Once it looked pink, you were happy to go, yeah.
Of course, yeah. As soon as it's pink, just to annoy you.
Yeah, fantastic, and not nice, fresh, refreshing on this nice cold winter's evening.
It is indeed. As I said, I needed something summery because I'm missing the summer sun. It's way too rainy and drizzly at the moment. So
you live in the Midlands. I'm not sure what you're expecting.
I don't get to go to a beach at all. I have to travel a few hours to get to one.
See, this is why you should come and move down south. I get to go to the beach every day. I went for a run along the beach at lunchtime.
Oh, here we go. Look at you.
It's usually have to take on cocktails like that, though, if you live by the beach.
This is very true.
Right, so moving on. Significant news as it's week 18, or week 18 has just ended. There's not a whole lot of news. First of all, Cam Akers is back, guys. He's come back after an Achilles injury, and honestly, he didn't look great. But against that run defense, I don't know what you're expecting.
5 rushes for 3 yards, yeah.
And he's coming back off an injury that normally takes people over a year to come back from properly and get back to full speed. So for him to even be on the field at this point is insane to me.
100%. We're 5 months removed from him doing it, and normally you're a year before you get back on the field, and probably 18 months to 2 years before you look like yourself again. And the fact that he's back in 5 months, even on an NFL field, is absolutely mind-blowing. And now he's back. It doesn't matter really what he does over the next couple of weeks, but he's going to have a full off season now to get back into full shape, ready for next season.
Hopefully we get to see a lot more of him going through the playoffs, or the Rams will be one and done and the Cardinals will bounce them out. And I'm sure Paul Picken will be very happy about that. Now Lewis won't be. So
what's great with the Cam Akers thing as well is the fact that I don't think no one expects him to come back at all. No one expected him to come back and make any big waves this season. But the fact that he's coming back from what usually is a horrific injury at the back end of a season, to be able to get back on the field, know what that's like, feeling again, rather than having a full season, a full off season, and then that first game feeling quite timid and afraid of his own body. I think it's going to really stand him in good stead. And I'm likewise, I want to see what he can do next year with that full off season behind him.
It's a great point, because I think that, you listen or read anything that any sportsman say about injuries, is it's not the rehab, it's the nervousness around that kind of first game back, or first, step back onto that performance field. You can practice as much as you like, but until you're in a game scenario, take that first hit, you're never truly back, are you? So he's done that already. Hopefully, he gets a couple of weeks of some game time and can get back to what we'd hoped he'd be at the beginning of the year. But now he's got a whole off season. I'm really, quite shocked that he's recovered this quickly, but really pleased about him going forward.
The only other bit of news that I've got, guys, is it was Black Monday yesterday. So for those of you that don't know, a lot of coaches get fired on Black Monday. It's normally the Monday after the season ends. So quick rundown. You've got the Vikings, Danny. I don't know how you feel about this. Both Mike Zimmer and the GM have gone.
Okay with this. I think Zim was getting a bit spiky towards the end. I didn't really know what our direction was. We struggled on D, and that was his kind of bag, and he was play calling there. Offense should have been better, but there was times where we were scoring a lot of points, but we didn't know how many we concede. I think going in a different direction is going to be good. Spielman, I'm a little bit upset about, just because he feels like he's part of the furniture, but it does mean that we can look forward to not trading back for 18 picks in the fourth round, and we can just pick where we're supposed to pick. So we'll see what happens. It's exciting, but a lot of change, although the Wilfs are saying not a huge restructure or rebuild. So we'll see which direction they go.
Is there any particular, I know there's not names being thrown around at the moment, is there any particular name that you'd love to come see in?
I would love to move to a more offensive mind, and I think Kellen Moore would be nice to see. He's only 32, though, which would be the youngest head coach. Well, there's players that were playing this week that have got about 10 years on him. So it'd be a big step. But the way he's transformed sort of the Cowboys and their... Because obviously, Liam, you'll have views on how much the current Cowboys head coach as a coach. But yeah, I think Kellen Moore has really made that offense spark. So I'd love to see what he could do with players like Jefferson and Cook, and when Irv Smith comes back, because the focus has been on defense for quite a while now, and we've got a really potent offense.
So speaking about head coaches and GMs going at the same time, the Bears fired both Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, the GM. And then the only other firing as of today is Brian Flores from Miami. So that takes the total number of head coach vacancies up to 6, with the Broncos, the Jags, and the Raiders also added to that list from in-season firings. Guys, is there any one of those that you would take over everything else?
I think it's difficult to sit here and say that's the best job, because I think it depends what you're looking for. I think if you're, you're looking to get 2-3 years out of your first gig as such, probably you got to look at something like the Jacksonville Jaguars. You've obviously got Trevor Lawrence. They've got the first pick. They've not got much else. So I think you can probably convince ownership that you need 2-3 years to really kind of test your mettle. But for me, I'm really intrigued by what the Raiders do. I know that there's talk they might keep Pit Boss on for a little bit longer. But I think if they can go out and get a big name, they've got what I consider a top 10 NFL quarterback in Derek Carr. The defense has really taken big steps this year. I think if you can address that offensive line and maybe add in, either a potentially another deep threat to replace Henry Ruggs, I think that's a really interesting offense and a really interesting team that should potentially be playoff bound. But obviously the concern is you've got Mahomes and Herbert 4 times a year, which is probably not perhaps the most appealing. What about you, Danny? Is there any that you particularly love?
Going to the Raiders quickly, I think any Raiders fans deserve just some stability and to know where they're going. The fact that they've managed to put together the season that they have with all the off-field, tragedies in some cases, dramas in others, yeah, as you said, Derek Carr really stepped up this year and looked really good. So that's one. It's tough going to Miami as well. I feel like Brian Flores has been harshly treated. I don't know what you guys think, but it felt like a rough fire in there. And he managed to turn around what looked like a diabolical team at the start of the season into not a great team, but a serviceable team, which proved it had quite a few good moving parts. So that's something I'd be interested in. If I'm sitting here looking at what jobs are available as a Vikings fan, I'm taking the Vikings. But I think as a non-Vikings fan, that is a team that's either set up to win now or can do a really, really good job over the next couple of years and build into a decent, challenging side.
I think with Miami, you could spin that story either way, and I think that's a massive thing. So Flores, for those that don't know, had 3 losing seasons, missed the playoffs, and they were meant to be the up-and-coming team, and then the Bills took over as the up-and-coming team in the AFC East. But then when you drill down into it, he was 24 wins to 25 losses in his overall tenure as the Miami head coach, and he only just missed the playoffs twice in those 3 years. It's not like he was a horrendous head coach from those point of views, at least. I think I've heard reports of things where the team wasn't overly happy with him, and I think firing him as the head coach but not the GM says a lot about the firing, but as a personal point of view anyway.
I think it's an interesting thing for the Tua situation. I know there's been a few reports that there were some F-bombs from Tua directed at Brian Flores in the last couple of weeks. And I think that, if you're Tua, I'm not sure I ever get over being given the starting job, then being pulled several times for Ryan Fitzpatrick in your rookie season when you're the franchise quarterback. And I think that if I'm Tua, I've probably never got over that. I mean, I don't know if that says a lot about me as a person that I'd never get over something like that, whereas perhaps a professional athlete should. But I think that once he started doing that, it was always going to be difficult between him and Tua's relationship. And I think if Miami are saying kind of Tua's the guy for next year, which I think is kind of what they're saying, then I guess they needed to pick one of them. I couldn't see them the kind of surviving both as such. But
I think the only reason you want it, or the only reason you couldn't get over Flores basically sitting Tua is because it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think if it was any other quarterback, you'd have been fine with it. But because it was Ryan Fitzpatrick, you just couldn't stand it.
But exactly. But if you're a high drafted,
no, I get what you mean. I do get what you mean, but it's still funny that it was Ryan Fitzpatrick of all quarterbacks for you to pick up on.
Yeah, but it's like if Matt Nagy had given Justin Fields the job and then benched him for Andy Dalton. Like I would never have forgiven, Matt Nagy if I was Justin Fields, quite frankly. But enough talking about head coaches. Let's dive into the main bulk of the reason we're here. So we're continuing our Dynasty positional review. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through kind of the top 12 finishers at the position for this year, plus a couple of kind of notable other options, and basically talk through what we think about them, their kind of Dynasty value going forward, and where we kind of sit on them. So we'll start at the top in what has been perhaps the most mind-blowing season I think I've ever seen from a receiver. I think some of the Calvin Johnson years in the sort of 10 years ago were perhaps up there, but I'm not sure. We expected that from Calvin Johnson. I'm not sure anyone expected this from Cooper Kupp. So, Danny, coming to you, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 1 on the season. Wide receiver 1, I think, in terms of yards, receptions, touchdowns. What are you doing with him from a Dynasty perspective moving forward?
I was trying to buy Cooper Kupp hard before this season in every league that I had. I picked him in pretty much every best ball I was in, and all my Dynasty leagues I was trying to get him. I can't sit here and say I knew he was going to have the season that he had. I just thought that Stafford was going to be a huge upgrade and find him a lot more than Goff was doing. I think at this stage, I don't know what you could say his price would be. He's a strange one because he's had the season that he's had. He's 28, but he's only got 4 years in the league. He's got less tread on the tires than a lot of others. And it's hard to give up on a player like that when he's probably won league single-handedly for people. I think he continues on the trajectory he's on. We're going to see a decline next year, I think, because this is a hell of a season. But I don't think by much. I think he'll still be buzzing around this area next year. So I'd be keeping him at this point. But that's only because I don't know if I'd be happy with whatever I got for him, because I wouldn't know what that price should be.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think that, because he's had this insane season, he's been a solid kind of fringe wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 for a few years. But to break out in this kind of sense, as you said, at age 28, it's difficult to go all in. And, he's currently the wide receiver 6 in ADP. It's hard to get him higher just because of that age piece. I mean, Liam, if you were a sitting prettier contender for next year, what would you be willing to go and spend to kind of go and buy him?
Yeah, as you both said, it's tough because of the age piece. I'd potentially go and buy a different style piece. One that we're probably going to talk about later is Deontay Johnson, that I'd be looking at potentially getting, or even some of the older guys that we're talking about, just because their price is going to be cheaper. But I think with Cooper Kupp, you're probably talking over 2 firsts at this point. I don't think you're getting him for 2 firsts or anything under that. Even though he is 28, he just had an historic season, didn't he? So I think I'd be comfortable 2 firsts and a second. I think pushing 3 firsts is a bit too much for me.
Yeah, I think he's a really difficult player to move at the moment, because I think if you're selling, you're sitting there saying, I want at least 3 firsts. But I'm not sure anybody's paying that for, as we said, a age 28 wide receiver. I mean, looking at ranks here, so Liam and I have both got him as our wide receiver 7. Danny, you're up at wide receiver 3. I mean, do you foresee, what are we talking, 2 years? Do you think he's got a 3rd year in there that he can keep producing?
I'm purely looking, because I balanced this out on the age, because I saw the 28, but the fact that he's 4 years in the league, he's got less tread. I think if he keeps his body right and he stays healthy, that he can continue to do this. If you get sort of Van Jefferson going, you get... I've never been... This is probably going to get me in Rich's bad books, but I've never been a Bobby Trees fan. If he...
I thought you were going to slander Tutu Atwell then.
Yeah, I thought that's where it was going as well.
Well, I can do if that's the way we want the show to go. But, yeah, I think that... Because all season I kept thinking, look, the game plan. Stop Cooper Kupp after like game 6, game 7. I'm like, stop him. And nobody could. And I think that was down to... Because it's the first year that Stafford's been there. So the fact that they built that relationship so quickly, and then we'll have even more to go off, and it being such a good offense. I just think he's got 2-3 years left. I've got him this high just because I think he wins a couple more leagues if you're looking for a top receiver that's going to consistently put up points, because he's shown this year that it's not just big points, it's consistent big points. And that's something that you don't get with a lot of guys.
I mean, his season finishes, so he's had 7 top 5 weeks. 14 of his 16 weeks he finished as a top 12. Like, if you're getting a wide receiver 1 14 out of 16 weeks, I mean, you basically can't say enough about how insane this season was. I think for me, the one thing that makes me perhaps a bit more positive on Cooper Kupp is I think that, he's not a great athlete. And I'm using that in terms of NFL terms. Of course, he is, a fantastic athlete, but he's not an elite athlete in the NFL world. And I think that, to me, that's almost a good thing as he begins to age, because he's not relying on, elite speed or that kind of thing to win. He wins because he's a fantastic route runner and he can move all over the field and he does all the little things well. And that's the kind of thing that will continue with him over these next few years. So Liam, I'm going to come the wide receiver 2. I'm going to come to you first as he's kind of your boy. So Devontae Adams, he finishes the wide receiver 2. He's again, in a similar range to Cooper Kupp, so he's currently the wide receiver 5 in ADP. Are you concerned that this could be the beginning of the end with Devontae Adams being a free agent, Aaron Rodgers potentially leaving, or do you think it's potentially a decent time to buy, one of the elite wide receivers because people are getting off him because of his age?
I think if there is ever a time to buy, it's now, because there is a dip with the free agency rumors and stuff like that. I've also seen rumors from Packers Twitter that we're going to franchise tag him. Obviously, that is 2 months away, so we're not going to know anything like that. But that there's still a way for Devontae Adams to stay in Green Bay, and there's still a way for both Rodgers and Adams to stay in Green Bay. But I am really skeptical about his future. I do have him as my wide receiver 3 just because I'm so confident about his skills, his route running, etc., that I think if he goes anywhere else, he can still perform in a top 12 capacity. But if he does go and Rodgers goes, then I'll be looking at dropping him a little bit. I don't think I'll be dropping him too much, though.
Danny, you're a little bit lower than consensus on Adams. You got him as your wide receiver 7. Do you think is it the Rodgers concern? Is it the age? What's the big worry for you?
It's a mixture of the two. I know I've just saved Cooper Kupp by saying he's 28 and Adams is 29, but he's got 7 years in the league. Whereas again, there's just a bit more tread. He's been banged up a few times. He's taken hits. He knows. He's going to get to that stage now where his body's going to start giving him signs that certain things are going to need to change about his game. If that happens and Aaron Rodgers isn't throwing to him anymore, or I don't think we'll see a Kenny Golladay situation where he goes to somewhere else and just disappears into obscurity, because he's a much better player than that. For me, he is one of, if not the best wideout in the league, and it pains me to say that, seeing him in the NFC North way too many times. But he is an unbelievable athlete. It's just those concerns about, is he going to stay? Where does he end up? Is he going to go if Rodgers does? Is Rodgers going to be there? He's 29. Does that? I mean, I turn 29 tomorrow, and my body after a Brit Ball season, I know about it. I know that he's got access to all the trainers and the nutritionists in the world, but he's gonna start feeling it as well. So it was purely that. Even if he stays in Green Bay, I would love to see him still be at the top of these lists next year. But my head just says be a bit smarter than that and maybe look at a decline over the coming years.
I think he's an interesting one to monitor, because I think that for me, unless the Packers win the Super Bowl, if we're heading into the off season, you can guarantee that February, March is going to be filled with where's Aaron Rodgers going. And I think that once that starts happening, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Devontae Adams' price plummet. And I think
we saw it last year.
Exactly. And I think that if we're talking, if he's wide receiver 5 in ADP at the moment, if I can get him at that like wide receiver 8, wide receiver 9 price, I'm smashing that all day, because I'm coming around. I know I've been saying all season, Liam, I've been winding you up that Rodgers is gone, but I'm coming around to Rodgers potentially staying. And I think if he does, you've got, a top 5 wide receiver for the next couple of years at least.
There has been a lot more talk, and from Rodgers himself as well, that kind of points towards him staying. Now, this is trying to read between the lines, and you probably should never do that with Aaron Rodgers, because he's proven time and time again not to do it. But he's done a lot of things over the past few weeks that you could see as him trying to mend that relationship. And who knows, I could be talking out my arse here, and no one really knows what's actually happening. But it does seem to be trending in a way where he is staying, especially if they do win a Super Bowl. I can't see him just ditching after that, but who knows?
Yeah, it's hard. I think for me, it's hard to see a better situation out there right now. Now, that might change come February, March, but I think, the Packers have got a top 2-3 roster in the league, and he's going to struggle to find something better out there, isn't he? So the wide receiver 3 on the season was Deebo Samuel, another kind of out of nowhere season. But I'll be honest, this absolutely gobsmacks me. So his current value in ADP is the wide receiver 15. Danny, do you think that he is incredibly undervalued at the moment? Do you think he's a risk because we've obviously got this potential quarterback change looming on the horizon? What are you doing with Debo?
He's a younger Cordarrelle Patterson from this season.
Ouch.
And I think...
Ouch, that's brutal.
Tough crowd, Danny.
If we look at his receiving stats, he had some great games to start the year, and then towards the back end, he was used as a bit part running back. And I think that for San Francisco, that is their game plan. They've always been successful there. I think injuries, most are going down straight away, led them to think, well, what do we do? I went hard on Trey Sermon, thinking they traded up to get him, and then Eli Mitchell comes out of nowhere. So you just never know what that running back room is going to look like. And I think next year they'll get that sorted and they won't rely on Debo as much. You've also got the fact that there may be a changing quarterback. If he's not it was Trent Sherfield in preseason, and for his first couple of looks was Trey Lance's best friend. So it could be anyone. We don't know who that go-to guy is going to be. I don't see it being Debo Samuel. I'm not on that train. And I know you guys have got him in your sort of top 12, and I left him out completely.
Yeah. So if you've got Debo, Danny, I presume you're selling for whatever you can get. What would it take to kind of tempt you to pass on him?
I mean, I don't know if I'm selling for whatever I can get. I think I'm going to lean on people that believe he's going to stick around and do this for a while. And he's 25. He's second year, third year breakout sort of area. I think I'd be leaning towards talking up him doing well. But from a personal point of view, my head just says I don't think he is. I think you'd get some decent offers out there, especially with some of the points that he's put up. There's some games that are bordering on 30 points, one that's surpassed in my leagues. There's 4 games where he's gone over 150 yards, and that's receiving. That's not me pretending he's a running back. So I think you can be looking at first and other pieces that you might need. I think with a lot of these players, especially the aging receivers, trying to give those to a team that's ready to win now. If you're on the cusp to get some younger running backs potentially that may have had a bit of a down or off season where they've not shown as much as was expected. I think you could be trading a Debo Samuel, the running back, for an actual running back to come into your team and do a job.
You're really hammering home this running back theme with Debo, aren't you?
We drafted Cordarrelle Patterson at the Vikings and never had the Cordarrelle Patterson that he became as a running back. We had him as the Devin Hester wannabe. So there's a little bit of bitterness that I'm taking out on the wrong person here. But I can just see history repeating itself. And yeah, I'm gonna get out now, and I'm just gonna say no. Let's trade Debo and let me get a running back to add to my challenging team.
So Liam, if you're in leagues with Danny, what are you willing to spend to go and get Debo? As I think you're a little bit more of a believer, shall we say?
I am more of a believer than Danny, because Danny just seems like it's scarred by Cordarrelle Patterson, to be honest. But I think with Debo, I share the reservations that I don't know what this offense is going to look like next year. I do think Debo has shown a lot this year, and because of that, especially later on in the season, Kyle Shanahan has found a way to get Debo the ball. Yes, it's been in the run game a lot over the past few weeks, but I think that he's always going to find a way to get Debo the ball, whether that is through wide receiver screens or running the ball from the backfield or anything along those lines, little shovel passes, or even short routes for him to go and break off a big yak run. I think he's always going to have that opportunity with Kyle Shanahan's the head coach, and I think that's going to stay for a while after he just traded up, spending 3 firsts to go and get Trey Lance. So I do share the reservations, but at the same time, I think Debo is that talented that he will always get the looks. So to answer your question, Rich, I'm probably looking at a first and a second, and that's probably me being a bit stingy. You're probably looking at 2 seconds if you're trying to get anyone as a top 12 wide receiver, at least in your rankings. But the reason I say a first and a second, and probably more like a mid first and a second, that's probably because I'm still skeptical on Debo. But as soon as I see one game of Debo getting all the looks, I think I'd be all in, and I'd be spending 2 firsts for him at least.
So I think, excuse, I might go on a little rant here, but I think that perhaps the Dynasty community, perhaps we're almost, I think, trying to be a bit too perfect in how we're viewing our wide receivers. And I think that for me, and I had the rant earlier in the year about Cordero Patterson and how after week 2 we should be going in and buying him. And, I think that Deebo Samuel is an absolutely unique player in the NFL. He is a freak athlete. He is a guy that, and this phrase gets bandied around all the time. I'm guilty of it. I used it with Cooper Kupp in that he lines up all over the place. But Deebo Samuel literally does line up all over the place. And I think that you've seen now throughout an entire season of him being used all over the place. And he's averaged almost 21 points a game. Like, he's produced from a fantasy perspective. I think Kyle Shanahan knows what he's got in Deebo Samuel. And I think that the fact that he is, a 25-year-old that has just finished as the wide receiver 3, yet he's currently being valued as the wide receiver 15 in ADP, that for me screams massive bargain. And if people are concerned about Trey Lance, if people are concerned about him playing second fiddle to George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, great, because this is a guy that, of every receiver that we're going to talk about, he's got the highest racer, which is basically the conversion rate of air yards to actual receiving yards. He's at 1.34 there. No other player is above 1.3. I think that he can do more with less. And I'm really excited if maybe I need to go and send out some more offers quickly before this pod gets released. But I think that Deebo Samuel, I don't think you can pencil him in as a top 3 receiver probably again. But I think if you're getting him at wide receiver 2 prices, I think he's probably going to be a wide receiver 1, over the next 2-3 seasons. And he's only 25. And I think that offense is only going to take a step forward when it moves to Trey Lance. And yes, there'll be some hurdles to overcome. Yes, there'll be some bumps in the road. But this isn't a guy that is so reliant on elite quarterback play because of how he gets his points.
I mean, he just had Jimmy G. He's not relying on any elite quarterback, is he?
But at least Jimmy G is, he is an accurate NFL quarterback. He's got a quick release. He can get the ball out quick. It doesn't matter what quarterback comes in. You could stick Ryan Fitzpatrick in this offense and he can hand the ball off to Debo. He can throw screens to Debo. Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is that people are worried about Trey Lance saying, it could impact Debo. I don't think the offense is going to take a step back as a whole. So I think there's going to be the same number of opportunities there. If Deebo Samuel was a traditional X receiver who was getting 30-40% of his targets 20 yards down the field, and he was reliant on that elite accuracy from a quarterback, then yes, I'd be concerned transitioning to Trey Lance and a big change at quarterback and, that the impact that could have on him. But this is a guy that does most of his damage on that short to intermediate. You talked about getting the work in the screen game. You talked about getting the work out of the backfield. Any NFL quarterback can make those throws. Any NFL quarterback can turn around and hand the ball off to Debo. So if we can get him at a discount this offseason, I'm really intrigued. And I think, this pod is telling me that I need to go out and buy more Debo shares because I certainly don't have enough.
I mean, when you're praising him by saying Ryan Fitzpatrick can get him the ball and he'll do well, I think that's all you need to know. That's the seal of approval from Rich.
Exactly that.
There was something great from Rich there that my concerns came from the start of the season. He did well because it was when Brandon Ayuk was, well, where was Brandon Ayuk? He was too thin, he was too fat, it was a Tuesday, all these different excuses. Kittle got injured as well, so he had some big games then when they were looking at receiving. It was the running back concern. They were just playing everyone at running back. But something you said about Lance there is he will run. He'll do a lot more like that. But there might be the short intermediate routes or check downs where you'd want someone like Debo with that explosiveness to make a few plays. And you sold me a little bit on the price. If you can get him at the prices that you were saying, Rich, I think I'd be tempted. I don't think I'm fully swayed, but the rant was very good. So if anyone comes with an offer from Rich, accept it. But yeah, I think you've made some very, very valid points, and maybe it is just the ghost of Cordarrelle Patterson III that's making me feel like this.
I'll count that as a win, and then we'll move on to perhaps the most hotly debated topic at the moment, it feels like, in Dynasty circles. So the wide receiver 4 and the wide receiver 5 on the season, I'm going to lump them together because it feels like they're going to spend the rest of their career being lumped together. So we've got Justin Jefferson was the wide receiver 4. He's currently the wide receiver 1 in ADP. And then Jamar Chase was the wide receiver 5. He is the wide receiver 2 in ADP. So Danny, I feel like as a Vikings fan, I can already kind of read your mind and know where you're going here. But where's your Dynasty wide receiver 1? Who would you rather own out of these two?
I mean, I didn't listen to the question. I was just griddying in my bedroom. But yeah, Justin Jefferson, I think he really looks the real deal. We saw Thielen having injuries this year. Irv Smith was out. You throw into KJ Osborne and Tyler Conklin, who both did admirable jobs, but Jefferson was still putting up points and looking great, even though a lot of, any defense we faced was kind of focused on him. And I think going forward, whether we keep Cousins or the new coach and GM look a different way, you could do a whole episode on where Kirk Cousins needs to go or ends up.
I'm gonna break some news for you here, Danny. Kirk Cousins is going to be your quarterback next year. You might bring in a rookie, you might bring in someone else, but with that contract, Kirk Cousins is going nowhere.
It was wishful thinking. But yeah, I think he's a very accurate quarterback, and when you throw in players like Justin Jefferson, they can either do it after the catch, they can do it down the field. He just looks the real deal. Jamar Chase, just to touch on him, I think they are going to be lumped together for the foreseeable. They seem to be the elite sort of breakouts. Jamar Chase in his first season, from preseason when we were told that he couldn't see the ball without the white lines on it, like at college, and that the ball was too big. Like an NFL player would have never seen a ball before in his life when he was playing all his life. That baffled me, but I kind of bought into it a little bit. And he started to see big looks down the field from Burrow, and it was sort of really deep balls that were adding to his yardage. And then towards the back end of the season, he won quite a few playoff/championship games with like a 50+ point week when he went over 200 yards and did all he did. So, and that's in his rookie season. So I just think I'd take Jefferson just because I've seen more of him. But Jamar Chase just looks like he's going to be head and shoulders above sort of the rest of the pack with JJ going forward.
What about you, Liam? Where are you sitting?
I see both sides of the argument. So I think I spoke to Kev on Twitter not too long ago, so Kev White from the Dynasty Wildcard podcast, because he put out a tweet very similar to what the conversation we're having now. And I responded saying that I think Justin Jefferson is going to be, or is my wide receiver 1 at least. But I understand both sides of it. So Justin Jefferson has got the extra year in the league, which is where I'm coming from. You've seen it for a second season, him be a top 12. I think he was top 5 last year as well. Top 5 wide receiver, or top 6 at least. Whereas with Chase, it's kind of a not a one-off, but it is his first year doing it. On the flip side of that, you've got Chase as the extra year. He's younger. He's got the extra year on his contract as well, and he's tied to a younger quarterback for a longer time. And sorry, Danny, I don't know whether I need to say sorry for this, but I think Joe Burrow is better than Kirk Cousins. So
How about it?
So I think I understand the argument for Chase. The only reason that I'm going with Jefferson is the fact that we've seen it 2 years running now, and I can't see him slowing down outside of injury, which, as we've spoken about many times before in the past year, Rich, you can't predict them. So there's no point in really thinking about it until it happens.
Yeah, and without wanting to sound like I'm just echoing what you guys are saying, I'm pretty similar. Look, yes, Jamar Chase put up better stats in college where they played together. Jamar Chase, has had a better rookie season than Justin Jefferson did, and Jamar Chase is tied to the college quarterback that he had those elite records with in college. But I think for me, the reason I lean Justin Jefferson is I think that he is. I think it says a lot about where you play as a dynasty player, and I think Jamar Chase is going to have those bigger boom weeks, but I think that Justin Jefferson is going to be perhaps more consistent. And I think for me, from this, if I'm paying wide receiver one overall prices, I want someone that I can rely on week in, week out. I think if you look at just this season, so Jamar Chase had 7 of his 16 weeks finished as a top 24 receiver, whereas Justin Jefferson was at 12. I just think that Justin Jefferson will be a more reliable week-to-week option. They'll probably end up, putting up similar fantasy points, and it's a case of what would you rather? Would you rather, 5 absolutely monster weeks, 6 or 7 solid weeks and a few terrible weeks, or would you prefer, the majority is sort of good weeks? And for me, I'd lean the safety and security and that consistency of someone like a Justin Jefferson. So the wide receiver 6 on the season, a little bit disappointing, I think, based on the fact, this was a preseason Dynasty wide receiver 1. Many people in redrafts wide receiver 1, and that's Tyreek Hill. We've obviously seen the battle and the challenges that the Chiefs offense has had this year. Danny, do you think it's, at 27 years old, it's time to get out on Tyreek, or do you think he's potentially in line for a big bounce back season next year?
I think if he was 27 years old and wasn't showing the same blistering speed that has set him apart from quite a few receivers, I'd be more worried, but he seems to have retained that. And I think, as you say, there's been a few issues this season with, at a time, no one on this podcast, I'm sure, but at a time there was people questioning how good Mahomes was after a 3-game stint. So I hope to play with those in fantasy football going forward, because there were some ridiculous takes coming out there. But I think he is just a consistently safe pair of hands, and he always seems to pop up. You always think, when I think of him, it's always deep routes, blistering speed, but he always seems to be the guy that's catching touchdowns in the corner of the end zone, or like 5-yard throws to get a catch, and he comes from nowhere, and he just seems to do what he wants at times, regardless of whether the route he's run has worked. Mahomes buys you more time, so Tyreek Hill can kind of improvise. And I think him and Mahomes have noticed that. And they've spoken about it this year anyway, that happens. I think he just offers so much as a player to one of the greatest quarterbacks in the league. So I'm still in him for a few years because, 27 and still showing that speed. So I think he'll bounce back next season when the whole Chiefs offense will be hoping to.
And Liam, do you think it's bounced back? Do you think we're going to be in a position where Tyreek is back to the kind of top 5 that we've seen in the last few years?
I think it's very harsh calling Tyreek a bounce back candidate because, yes, he was the wide receiver 1, but the only way he's down from wide receiver 1, you can't overachieve. So I think it's very harsh to call him a bounce back candidate when he finishes the wide receiver 6, especially after having such a tough, offensive display for a lot of the season, to the point where some people, whether they know a lot about football or not, started questioning Mahomes and the entire offense. That said, I do think he bounces back in quotation marks to the top 5 that we used to seeing from him. But yeah, just to echo what Danny said, really, he's so quick and he just seems to do what he wants. The only concern I have with Tyreek is he's coming into his final year of his deal. But I have no real hesitations about him, because I can't see the Chiefs ever letting him get to free agency, to be honest.
No, I'm not concerned about that. I think he's likely to get re-signed at a decent number. I wouldn't be shocked if they gave him, he signed that 3-year deal whilst he had some legal troubles looming over him. So I wonder, now he's had a couple of years where he's sort of been a good boy, shall we say? I think the Chiefs will look after him slightly longer term. One thing touching on what you said, Danny, about seeing him bursting deep. So I just wanted to rattle off some quick numbers for you. So in 2018, he averaged 20.5 points a game, and he scored 43.5% of those fantasy points from deep passes, which are passes that are 20 yards or more from the line of scrimmage. In 2019, he was at 48% of his points from deep passes. In 2020, he was at 33%. And then this year, he was at 18.6%. So he's gone from, 30s, 40% to 18%. And I think that's a huge amount of that is the shift that we've seen this year in how defenses are playing the Chiefs. And I've talked about it a couple of times about this, huge amount of those cover 2 shells, and basically sitting back and saying to the Chiefs, have 10, 15 play drives if you want to score, but you're not getting a quick one over the top. And I think that we've slowly seen Tyreek Hill kind of change the type of receiver he is, and he's seen a lot of more of those shallow crossers and those, dig routes across the middle. And I think that hopefully there will be another weapon brought into this offense. I think you saw them go out and get Josh Gordon, which I don't think brought the element they were hoping for. And I wouldn't be shocked if we saw them make similar to the moves they did last year with their offensive line. I think they're a target to whether it be go out and trade for, an established veteran that can be that kind of outside X receiver, or whether they go out and get maybe trade up for someone like a Burks or a Drake London in the draft to be that bigger bodied receiver to hopefully take some of that, force teams out of that cover 2 shell. Because if you are going to sit back in that cover 2 shell, we're just going to bombard this bigger body with some underneath targets, and that will free up some room for Tyreek Hill. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still excited about Tyreek Hill. He's my Dynasty wide receiver 4, and I really believe in him moving forward. And let's be honest, there's a lot worse quarterbacks to be tied to over the next few years than Patrick Mahomes. Gonna try and speed things up now. We're getting into the back end of the kind of wide receiver 1s. So Stephon Diggs, I guess it was pretty much as you'd expect, perhaps not quite in the way that you'd hoped, but he was the wide receiver 5 coming in. He finished as the wide receiver 7. He's now the wide receiver 8. It kind of feels like he's that mid wide receiver 1, not really going any higher, not really going any lower. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I hate to admit it because it's Stephon Diggs. He gave me the best moment of my football watching life with the Minneapolis Miracle, and then slammed us again and left with a bit of a cloud. We were given Justin Jefferson in that deal, so it worked out. But he is just such a high flow guy, and Josh Allen immediately built up this great rapport with him. And he makes some unbelievable plays, but he makes them consistently. I think he's got a few years in Buffalo as the guy. And like you say, he's going to give you that mid wide receiver 1 range on a consistent basis.
I do wonder, Liam, if he's, I just said there, he's sort of, he's wide receiver 1. We've sort of brushed over him. Do you think he's almost entering that unsexy, perhaps a value at the moment?
I don't know how much you can say of value at ADP wide receiver 8, but I do think that he will put up consistent points like what he's done this season for the next 2 years. He is going to be in Buffalo for the next 2 years. The thing that I have struggles with, he does have a significant savings on him if the Buffalo Bills decide to cut him. I just don't see any reason for them to cut him. Like when I say significant, I mean 2023 they would save roughly $14 million by cutting him, but I don't think you're ever going to cut Diggs. I think that contract will get restructured if they ever needed to save anything there. I don't think he's a value yet, just because I think this is kind of where we're going to see his production for the next 2 years, and it might not be pretty like it wasn't pretty this season. There were weeks where you just didn't see Diggs, and then there were weeks where we saw a lot of him. But yeah, I think this is roughly the range that you kind of see him go. At the moment, I have him as wide receiver 11 in my rankings, just because I think certain players just have the age and are tied to better situations than Diggs, and that's crazy talk coming from or for a guy that is tied to Josh Allen.
Yeah, and so moving on to wide receiver 8, I personally won't spend much time talking about this. I think people have probably heard me talk about him far too much over the past 18 months. It's Deontay Johnson, one of my very much true loves. Danny, do you think he's currently wide receiver 11 in ADP? It looks like he's going to have a new quarterback next year. Do you think he can sustain this kind of late-end wide receiver 1 price, or do you think that a new quarterback coming in could be a good opportunity to move off Deontay?
I hope that a new quarterback coming in leads a lot of people to sell him, namely to me and you, Rich. I'm guessing. I'm hoping Liam feels the same.
I already own him in most leagues, so don't worry about that. If you
can have the productive season that he has had this year, with Juju going down, Chase Claypool being sort of boom or bust, and having the corpse of the once great Big Ben throwing to him and still putting up those numbers, if you get anyone, whoever that turns out to be, that's accurate and gets him the ball, he's going to make things happen. So, yeah, I think he's probably going to be up there top 10 for the next few years. I'm hoping that people see him as a lot less than that, but I think that's probably his floor for me. I just think he can really go on and do some great things.
Liam, are you concerned about the new quarterback?
No, I'm with Danny. The only thing I'd say is interesting is he's coming to the end of his contract after this year, after the 2022 season. So he might not be in Pittsburgh. I can't see them letting him go again because he's done so well with Big Ben, or the corpse of Big Ben, as Danny put it. I can't see them letting
apologies,
him go.
Ben.
Trust me, you never have to apologise to Big Ben for anything after. Should we say with his reputation, the bloke doesn't deserve any apologies. Yeah.
But let's bring it out the gutter, guys. Deontay Johnson, I think I've got him as my wide receiver 10, and I'm the lowest out of all three of us. I think that says everything the listeners need to know from what we think of him, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he's entering that territory for me as best route runner in the league. I think he's very much in that top 3 range now. I'd probably throw Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, and maybe you could argue sort of Calvin Ridley or Jerry Jeudy, but he's very much in that tier for me. And I think that it doesn't matter whose quarterback's going to be, the guy just gets open. So I'm not concerned at all. The next two, again, I'm going to lump these two together because I think they're an interesting kind of case study. And that's Mike Evans, who finished as a wide receiver 9, and Keenan Allen, who finished as a wide receiver 10. So these guys have both dropped significantly in their ADP, despite putting up wide receiver 1 seasons. So Mike Evans came into the year as the wide receiver 19. He's now the wide receiver 25 in ADP. Keenan Allen, someone might have to explain this to me. He was the wide receiver 13 coming into the season. He's now the wide receiver 28, despite putting up a wide receiver 1 season and having, arguably the best young quarterback in the league throwing the ball. Do you guys think that this is the Dynasty community being ageist yet again and trying to get out too early on these guys? They're 28 and 29 respectively. Danny, do you think that we've still got potentially a couple more seasons of these guys being elite guys?
100%. I think it comes down to the age thing with Evans, especially having hamstring injuries when you're an older wide receiver isn't a great injury to be having. It kind of
feels harsh calling a 28-year-old old.
It's the Dynasty community. That's ancient. I turn 29 tomorrow. I'm allowed.
He's 29, turning 30 next year, by the way.
So yeah, you're looking at those ages. I think that people are when you're talking about players like Jefferson at the top end of it and Jamar Chase. When you start to look at Evans and Allen, it feels like they've been around for so long that they should be older than they are, and it's just the experience thing. I've in my home league, especially, which is the one that I'm keen to win year on year, I've got them both and don't plan on moving them because I think they are some key pieces. When it comes to drafting going forwards or prices, I think people are going to have different views, but it does become an age thing. Old for the sport of American football, not old in life. That's me getting myself through my birthday tomorrow. So
I think these two are two of my favourite buys in the off-season. If I'm a contender,
Yeah.
these are guys that I'm looking at to go and acquire because I think that, you know, particularly as people start to get infatuated with the rookies and we start, you know, the yearly cycle of being age obsessed. I do think that if you're paying wide receiver 2, you know, potentially even wide receiver 3 prices for guys that I think you can pencil in as a wide receiver 1, early wide receiver 2 over the next couple of years, I'm feeling very confident if I'm a contender and I'm rostering those two. We've talked, Liam, about a couple of breakouts this year that kind of came out of nowhere, but perhaps the biggest out of nowhere player finished as wide receiver 11, and that's Hunter Renfrow. So in August ADP, so DLF, they went 96 receivers deep, and Hunter Renfrow was not drafted as one of those top 96 receivers. He is currently the wide receiver 33 in ADP, but obviously, as I said, had that, quite frankly, breakout year. Do you think that we can buy into Hunter Renfrow for next year, or do you think that it's, you know, he's going to settle back into that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range and just be a bit of a plodder moving forward?
I mean, when you say buy in, his current ADP is wide receiver 33, and I think that's perfectly fine with what we can expect from him next year. My biggest concern is a lot of his high scoring point games towards the end of the season was because of Darren Waller being out. Now, to start the season, he still wasn't bad. Let's point that out. He still wasn't bad. He was still a really good wide receiver, but he scored and he was at the forefront of people's minds because Darren Waller wasn't around. I think maybe the new coaching staff comes in and decides to bring in a wide receiver from the draft, and we've already, or I keep banging on about it, and I'm going to keep banging on about it for the next few months. The wide receiver free agency class is looking great. So who knows that they could bring in 2 good wide receivers, and that significantly hurts Renfrow. Equally, they might not bring in anyone of too much of note, and then Renfrow still has a good role to play there. I think wide receiver 3 is a price I'm very willing to pay. He's bordering on wide receiver 4 price at the moment, and I'm very willing to pay that to get an extra flex position.
And Danny, do you think this is again the Dynasty community becoming infatuated with the sexiness of younger and other players, and you know the third and Renfrow is just perhaps not so sexy, so he could be a great value again?
Yeah, I think that's the first time in his life that Hunter Renfrow has been called a sexy American football player. I drafted him in a few leagues because of third and Renfrow, and I thought it'd be nice to see where his career went, and I wanted that to be on my rosters. But he's just a player that I would never feel comfortable starting because I don't think he's going to make any big splash plays. From listening to Derek Carr interviews this year, he said how safe a pair of hands he is. He breaks tackles. He's always looking for the ball. He's always in the right positions. But then with all the issues that you've had with Waller injury, Brian Edwards not playing out as people thought it might, Deshaun Jackson, Zay Jones are in there, and then the Henry Ruggs. Hunter Renfrow was the guy that you kind of had to throw to. I don't think he continues down this route, and he's just not someone I feel comfortable ever starting. So I don't think I'd really roster unless I was desperate.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I think he's one of these guys that you're probably going to find the next couple of years his production will outweigh his price almost every year. and I think he'll be undervalued. But as you said, it's, if he's your wide receiver 4, then yeah, you're probably feeling good. But I just can't get excited about him as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. And yes, he feels like he's not got the ceiling that others have got because of that sort of kind of possession nature. But he did have 2 top 5 weeks this year. But I do tend to agree with you. I think he's my wide receiver 30. So I can't sit here and say he's a great value when I've only got him around 3 spots ahead of ADP. So, yeah. And then the final wide receiver in the top 12 was Mike Williams, who it felt like burst onto the scene. Should we say? I think it was the first 4 weeks, completely exploded and then sort of drifted around a little bit, had a few disappointing weeks before coming back all right down the stretch. I mean, Danny, he's a free agent heading into this offseason. Do you think that, he's going to come back to San Diego? Do you think he's going to come back to the Chargers, or do you think he could be finding a new home and therefore kind of dropping in terms of his value?
The latest thing I read from Mike Williams is that he would like to stay, but of course you would want to stay with that offense and Justin Herbert. I think he's a great big body receiver that makes huge plays. I was trying to buy him before this season, knowing that he was going into free agency, because I thought he'd have some really big splash games. And I think he could excel if Keenan Allen wasn't opposite him, in the same way that I think Michael Gallup, before the injury that he had at the end of the season, goes on to become maybe a wide receiver 1 in a different offense. He was that sort of player to me. I think if he does come back, he's going to be better for fantasy, because Justin Herbert throwing to you makes you a better player, I think, depending on where his landing spot would be. But yeah, from a fantasy point of view, I'd like to see him back in, not San Diego. I was going to do the same thing, back with the Chargers. And I think that the Chargers might look to make that work, because you want to surround such a good young quarterback with talent. And Mike Williams really is someone that complements Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler for that matter as well. So yeah, I think he's a great player that deserves his top 12 finish.
Yeah. And Liam, do you think that, would you be buying him now ahead of that potential free agency bump, or do you think now's a good time to sell before his price potentially plummets as we head into free agency?
I struggle with Mike Williams because he's only going as the wide receiver 35 in current ADP or December ADP. So is his price going to plummet that much? I don't think so. I think it's a weird situation where if you've got him, you're probably looking at a mid-first plus. And if you're trying to get him for wide receiver 35 numbers, you're probably not willing to pay that. So what I'm probably trying to say is he's a hold, but I don't know whether this is me being overly cautious with a guy that I like, because I don't want to see it happen again. But I can see a Golladay situation happening. I know Danny mentioned it earlier. I can see kind of a Golladay situation happening where he does go to a new team and then takes maybe a year to get into that system properly, just because of how kind of out of the way this season kind of came for Mike Williams. I don't know how you two feel about that, because maybe it's me being a little bit cautious.
I think, yeah, it's quite right to be concerned. I think he's got that potential. He's probably the highest named wide receiver that I think could potentially leave. I think, as you said, Devontae Adams will be back. I think Chris Godwin's will be back. So that kind of leaves him out there. And I think that he's going to be wanting to put himself in that probably 15 to 18 million a year range. And I'm just trying to load the Chargers cap number now. But I think when you've got Justin Herbert potentially looming over it, I don't know whether you can be committing big money to. Okay, I'll take it all back. They've got 72 million in cap space this offseason. I'll take it back. I don't think Mike Williams is going anywhere with that number. So yeah, I expect him to be back. It's hard because he's a 1B, isn't he? I don't think he's ever going to be a 1A in this offense, and that caps that ceiling. And I think that, probably he's my wide receiver 35, so I've got him in that wide receiver 3 range. I don't particularly like these sort of boom bust options that rely on contested catches. So the last, that concludes kind of the top 12. We've got a couple of names that we're in around the top 12 in terms of points per game. So Antonio Brown finishes the wide receiver 6 in points per game. We won't touch on him too much, but Chris Godwin finished as the wide receiver 16, but it was actually the wide receiver 8 in terms of points per game. Danny, do you think, obviously coming off the injury, could potentially not be fit for camp, is a free agent? Do you think Godwin could be a sneaky kind of buy the injury dip, or are you concerned about him come the start of next year?
I think if you can get him for a price you're comfortable with, he would be a buy during this injury dip. My concern with his injury is the ACL, MCL tear. That was the Bolton tear. But they said that it didn't have any damage to the meniscus, which they were pleased about. But still, it's not a nice injury to have for a receiver that does a lot sort of over the middle. He'll catch the short routes and he's got that speed. I do worry about his longevity, having that success coming off that injury, and not maybe being able to have that camp time either. But I think if you're comfortable with the price, I think you could probably buy the dip. And I'd be, I don't know if it's a dart throw for someone who is as good as Chris Godwin, but coming off that injury, having a dart throw at someone like that, if it doesn't pay out and he isn't the player he was, I'm not too upset, because the upside is probably worth it if it does come off.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a lot of question marks. As much as Chris Godwin is, a fantastic receiver, and he is, an elite player, an elite fantasy producer, he's coming off the injury. He's a free agent. His quarterback, potentially is back next year. Are we expecting a 45-year-old Tom Brady to be elite again? But I can't get away from just how kind of good he is. A little stat that I dug out. So he led the league this year in terms of points per game off of screens. So he averaged 5 points per game just off wide receiver screens, whereas no other player averaged more than 3. So I think that kind of comes back to, if Brady's back, if he's back in Tampa, it's good for him. But I am a little bit nervous. That being said, he's still my wide receiver 13. I'm still very comfortable going out and buying him, because I think that, as you said, Danny, if you can buy any injury dip, I think it's a good time to grab him. Liam, is there anything else you wanted to add about Chris Godwin before we finish up?
No, I think you've covered everything. The only concern for me is the wide receiver screens. We know that Arians likes to get the ball to his winning blockers, and maybe that is a pure Arians thing. I know that Matt LaFleur likes to do it as well, but it's not widespread across the league that wide receiver screens are the only way to get them the ball. So maybe Godwin does take a little bit of a dip if he does go to a new team. But apart from that, no, I have him as my wide receiver 14 purely because I moved to the guy that we're about to talk about just above him before this pod.
I was gonna basically skip him and not talk about him, but now you've teased him, I guess we have to. But that's T Higgins. Go on then, Liam. The floor is yours. You can have 30 seconds on T Higgins.
Purely because of his points per game stat. I saw him as the wide receiver 24 finish and didn't really think much of it. And then when I saw T Higgins was the wide receiver 13 in points per game, that changed everything for me. The fact that Chase was the wide receiver 5 and he could still be the wide receiver 13, I think kind of blew me away a little bit. And that is exactly where I've got him in my rankings. He's just outside my wide receiver, top 12 wide receivers. So I think Higgins going forward with him being young, that receiving core with Boyd and Chase is very stable for the next few years contract wise. I think there's no reason not to have Higgins pretty high right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, hard to disagree with anything you said there. So, Danny, thank you ever so much for coming on. It's been lovely to get you back on. Where can the listeners find you and follow you and that sort of things?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's been great again. It's always great to chat with you guys, and the time just flies by. I hope it does for the audience in the same way it does for us, because it feels like no time at all when you're talking about this stuff. But yeah, so I'm going to be returning to write exclusively for 5 Yard, and then everything will be pushed through Twitter, and I'm going to start to become more active now. I'm in a better mindset at Dynasty Dan 1 or at Dynasty Danny if you are drunk and squint. So that will be the one. A few of Liam's cocktails and you might see it that way. But yeah, Dynasty Dan 1. And that's where I'll be back. So yeah, thanks for having me again, guys. It's been great.
No, thank you very much. And Liam, final word for your playoff leagues?
Yeah, so playoff leagues, I've got a sign-up sheets are live. If you go over to my Twitter, it's at the FSA Tweets. It's my pinned tweet. I will be tweeting it out during the week as well. $10, and it will be going through League Safe. There are 3 different formats, so you can choose which one. You can join all 3 if you really want to, and you're really not done with scoring points. So yeah, join up to those. And then a 5 Yard plug, Rich. I'm going to be opening up Dynasty Listener League sign-ups in the next few days. I've got the form ready. I want to roll over that league because it's annoying me sitting there as a 2021 league in Sleeper. So if you go over to at 5 Yard Dynasty, you'll see that going up in the next few days, and it will become a big pinned tweet as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on again, Danny, and thank you very much, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next week. We'll be reviewing, not previewing, the tight end position with a very special guest. And yeah, thank you very much. We'll see you again next week.